Leroy Nicky Barnes. Now that is a name that once struck fear and commanded some respect on the streets of Harlem. He was also known as Mr. Untouchable. Barnes grew up from the depths of drug addiction to become one of the most powerful and flamboyant drug kingpins of the 1970s. But now Barnes wasn't just another street hustler who got lucky. He was a criminal mastermind who built a $1 million empire on heroin. And it came complete with a corporate-style organized structure known as the Council. His operation was so sophisticated, and his influence was so far and wide that he seemed to be able to run his business with impunity. He even flaunted his wealth and power in the face of law enforcement. From his humble beginnings in Harlem to his eventual reign as the undisputed king of the New York drug trade, and then his eventual fall from grace, Barnes's story is one of ambition, power, betrayal, and finally, redemption. In this episode, we'll take a look at how a young man from the projects transformed himself into a criminal legend. We'll also take a look into the intricate workings of his drug empire and his battles with rival gangsters, plus his complex relationship with law enforcement. And we'll also examine the factors that led to his downfall, from his own arrogance to the relentless pursuit of law enforcement. And lastly, we'll take a look at the shocking twist in Barnes' story that no one saw coming. Come with us as we unravel the rise and fall of Barnes, the guy who went from Mr. Untouchable to the government's star witness. This is a story of power, greed, and the dark side of the American dream. Warning: the following video is meant for educational purposes only and should not be taken otherwise. Apex Crime Lords does not condone, encourage, or glorify the actions of the individuals covered in this program. Viewer discretion is advised. Keep watching until the end to see what's next on Apex Crime Lords. Leroy Nicholas Barnes was born on October 15, 1933 in Harlem, New York. He grew up in this vibrant but very troubled neighborhood. As a kid, young Nicky was exposed to the harsh realities of urban poverty and crime from a young age. Barnes's childhood was far from easy. His father was a hard-working but abusive guy, and he instilled in Nicky a deep-seated anger and resentment. This turbulent home life, plus the rough streets of Harlem, led Barnes on a path towards delinquency and drug use. By the time Barnes was a teenager, he was already involved in petty crimes and had developed a heroin addiction. This addiction would prove to be both his downfall and, believe it or not, the catalyst for his future criminal empire. In 1950, when Barnes was 16, he was arrested for the possession of a hypodermic needle. This was the beginning of a series of arrests and incarcerations that would define his early adulthood. Over the next 10 years, he cycled in and out of prison, and his addiction was growing stronger with each passing year. It was while he was in prison in the early 1960s that Barnes's life took a dramatic turn. While he was serving time in Green Haven Correctional Facility, he met a guy named Bumpy Johnson, who was a legendary Harlem gangster. Johnson took Barnes under his wing and taught him about the drug trade and the importance of organization and discipline when you're running a criminal empire. It was in prison that Barnes finally kicked his habit. He got into reading, and he studied everything from history and philosophy to business management. This self-education would later prove to be crucial in his rise to power. When he got released in 1969, Barnes was a changed man. He was no longer a street-level addict, and he was now armed with knowledge, ambition, and a clear vision of the empire he wanted to build. He had learned from his mistakes of the past, and he was determined to be a major player in the drug trade. Barnes was quick about establishing connections and building his operation. He aligned himself with the Italian Mafia, especially the Lucchese crime family, who was hooking him up with high-quality heroin from Southeast Asia. This connection gave Barnes access to something that was way better than what was typically available on the streets of Harlem. With his supply of heroin locked in, Barnes was able to assemble his team. He was very selective. He only chose individuals he could trust and who possessed skills that complemented his own. This selection in his hiring process would eventually lead to the formation of the Council, which was the governing body of his drug empire. As the 1970s dawned, Nicky Barnes was in a great position to take control of the Harlem drug trade. The street hustler addict was gone. and he was replaced by a shrewd businessman with big ambitions. The stage was all set for the rise of Mr. Untouchable. Barnes's rise to the top of the New York drug trade was as quick as it was dramatic. He had high-quality heroin from his Mafia connections and a sharp business acumen. Barnes set out to build an empire that would soon dominate the streets of Harlem and beyond. At the center of Barnes's success was his new and innovative approach to organizing his operation. He drew on his business knowledge that he had acquired in prison and formed the Council. This was a 7-member board that oversaw the various aspects of the drug trade. This corporate-style structure allowed for efficient management of the operation, and it helped shield Barnes from direct involvement in street-level deals. The council consisted of Barnes and his 6 trusted associates: Guy Fisher, Ishmael Mohammed, Joseph Jazz Hayden, Thomas Gaps Foreman, Frank James, and Wallace Rice. Each guy was responsible for specific territories and aspects of the business. They all had their part to play, from distribution to money laundering. It was this division of labor and responsibility that made the organization more efficient and harder for law enforcement to penetrate. Barnes's operation grew really quick and dominated the heroin trade in Harlem. At its highest point, it was estimated that his organization was grossing up to $100 million a year. Because of the high purity of his product, it was known on the streets as Nicky Barnes's Dope or Nicky's Specials, and that made it highly sought after, which allowed him to command premium prices. But now Barnes wasn't just happy with his financial success. He cultivated a larger-than-life public persona while dressing in expensive suits and driving flashy cars. He also went to the hottest nightclubs and became a symbol of success in the community. But his image was still a controversial one. Some people saw him as a Robin Hood figure because he was providing opportunities in a neighborhood that was plagued by poverty and neglect. So this flamboyant lifestyle earned him the nickname Mr. Untouchable. He seemed to be able to run his business freely and openly flaunted his wealth and power. In 1977, he even appeared on the cover of the New York Times Magazine while posing under the headline, Mr. Untouchable. Now, Barnes's influence went way beyond just the drug trade. He used his wealth to invest in legitimate businesses, which included auto shops, real estate, and restaurants. These legitimate business ventures served a dual purpose of laundering drug money and providing jobs for community members. Now, of course, Barnes's rise to power was not without its challenges. He faced constant threats from rival drug dealers, and he had to navigate a complex relationship with the Italian Mafia and, of course, some corrupt law enforcement officials. He had survived several attempts on his life, which further added to his mystique. Even though there were all these challenges, by the mid-1970s, Nicky Barnes had achieved a level of power and influence that few in the criminal world could ever match. He transformed himself from a street-level drug addict into one of the most successful and notorious drug kingpins in American history. But as Barnes would soon learn, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. It was his success and attention that would ultimately lead to his downfall. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation between Mr. Untouchable and the full force of federal law enforcement. At the top of his power in the mid-1970s, Nicky Barnes seemed like he was untouchable. His drug empire was generating millions of dollars annually, and his influence in Harlem was unmatched. However, maintaining this position required constant vigilance and adaptability. Barnes's success was due to a combination of his business acumen, strategic alliance, and ruthless enforcement. The council, which was his 7-member governing body, kept on being a key element in managing his expansive operation. They had regular meetings to discuss business strategies, settle disputes, and make decisions about the organization's future. Now, to protect his empire, Barnes had to employ a variety of tactics. He used violence when necessary, but he tried to resolve conflicts through negotiation when possible. He kept up a network of informants all throughout Harlem, who kept him aware of potential threats or opportunities. He also maintained relationships with corrupt law enforcement officials, which bought him protection and information. Barnes was also good at adapting to changes in the drug market, When cocaine began to gain popularity in the mid-1970s, he quickly included it in his operation, which of course ensured that his organization remained at the forefront of the drug trade. However, Barnes's high profile and flashy lifestyle began to attract unwanted attention. His appearance on the cover of the New York Times Magazine in 1977 was a particular turning point, and it sure didn't help things any. The article, which cemented his status as a cultural icon, also painted a big bullseye on his back. It got the attention of President Jimmy Carter, who reportedly told Attorney General Griffin Bell to go get Nicky Barnes. In response to the increased attention, Barnes became even more cautious. He developed the use of code words and hand signals to communicate with his associates, and became paranoid about potential informants and snitches within his own organization. Even though he was taking precautions, the pressure on Barnes's operation continued to grow. Federal investigators that were led by prosecutor Robert B. Fisk, Jr. were building a case against him. They used wiretaps, surveillance, and even turned some of Barnes's associates into informants. In a strategic move, Barnes tried to distance himself from any direct involvement in drug transactions, so he focused more on the financial areas of the business and hoped it would make it harder for prosecutors to link him directly to any drug crimes. But as the net tightened, cracks began to appear in Barnes's once solid organization. There was tension among the council, and some members were growing resentful of Barnes's dominant position and lavish lifestyle. Guy Fisher was one who began to emerge as a rival to Barnes's authority. Despite all these challenges, Barnes continued to project an image of almost invincibility. He famously boasted that the government would never be able to convict him, which was a claim that would soon be put to the test. In March of 1977, Barnes's rule as Mr. Untouchable came to an abrupt end. He was arrested with 10 other members of his organization, including all the people on the council. The stage was set for one of the most high-profile drug trials in New York history. As Barnes prepared to face justice, no one could have predicted the shocking turn his story was about to take. The fall of Mr. Untouchable would prove to be just as dramatic as his rise. Now, the arrest of Nicky Barnes in March of 1977 was the beginning of the end of his reign as the king of Harlem's drug trade. Barnes plus other members of his organization, plus all the members of the council, were taken into custody. The charges against them included conspiracy to distribute narcotics, possession of firearms, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. The trial began in September of 1977, and it was a media sensation. The prosecution, which was led by Robert B. Fisk, Jr., presented a mountain of evidence against Barnes and his co-defendants. This included testimony from former associates, a bunch of surveillance recordings, and financial records, which detailed the vast scope of Barnes's drug operation. Even with all this overwhelming evidence, Barnes remained defiant. He maintained his innocence and continued to project the image of Mr. Untouchable. He showed up at court each day in expensive suits, and he was convinced that he would beat the charges just like he had done in the past. But his luck had finally run out. On January 19th of 1978, after a 4-month-long trial, Barnes and his co-defendants were found guilty on all charges. It was a crushing blow, and Barnes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The conviction of Nicky Barnes was seen as a major victory in the war on drugs. It looked like it was the end of an era in Harlem and the dismantling of one of the most sophisticated drug operations in the country. But the story of Nicky Barnes was far from over. His time in prison would bring about a transformation that no one could have predicted. At first, Barnes tried to continue to run his operations from behind bars, but he soon learned that his former associates, especially Guy Fisher, had taken control of his territory and were cutting him out of the profits. What was even more painful is that Barnes discovered that Fisher was having an affair with his mistress. That left Barnes feeling betrayed and abandoned, so he made a decision that would shock the criminal underworld. In 1982, just 4 years after he was in prison, he decided to become a government informant. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Barnes agreed to testify against his former associates and provide information about the inner workings of the drug trade in Harlem. Barnes's cooperation was enormous. He gave evidence that led to the conviction of over 50 people, which included the members of his own organization and other high-ranking figures in the drug trade. His testimony was crucial in dismantling a lot of the infrastructure that he had helped to build. The law recognized his cooperation, and Barnes's sentence was reduced. In 1998, after serving 21 years, he was released from prison and entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. He was given a new identity and relocated to an undisclosed location. The fall of Nicky Barnes sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. This was a guy that looked like he was untouchable, and not only had he been brought down, but he turned against his former allies. It marked the end of an era in the history of organized crime in New York. Barnes's transformation from a drug kingpin to a government witness is still one of the most dramatic reversals in the history of American criminal justice. It serves as a reminder of the often unpredictable nature of loyalty and power in the world of organized crime. The story of Nicky Barnes is a complicated web of ambition, power, betrayal, and ultimately redemption. From his humble beginnings as a drug-addicted street hustler to his reign as Mr. Untouchable, and then finally his role as a government informant, Barnes's life really can't be categorized very simply. His rise to power in the 1970s in the Harlem drug scene was a testament to his business acumen and strategic thinking. He completely changed the street-level drug trade into a sophisticated corporate-style operation that generated millions of dollars annually, and his clever use of the council to manage his empire demonstrated a level of organization that had really never been seen in the criminal underworld. However, Barnes's story is also a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and the fleeting nature of criminal success. His high-profile lifestyle and his seeming invincibility ultimately contributed to his downfall. The fame and attention that he loved so much proved to be his undoing, as it spurred law enforcement to focus their efforts on bringing him to justice. Barnes's decision to cooperate with the government after his conviction was a shocking twist that was a real slap in the face to the traditional code of silence in the criminal world. His extensive testimonies not only led to the conviction of a lot of his former associates, but also gave valuable insights into how the drug trade worked that helped law enforcement efforts for many years to come. The legacy of Nicky Barnes is a complicated one. To some folks, he's the symbol of the destructive impact of the drug trade on urban communities. To others, his later cooperation with authorities and his apparent remorse suggests a story of personal redemption. Either way you look at Barnes, his impact on the history of organized crime in America is undeniable. His rise and fall coincided with a pivotal period in the war on drugs, and the methods used to bring him down would shape law enforcement strategies for decades to come. As we look back on the life of Nicky Barnes, we still have a lot of questions. What drives a person to pursue power and wealth through illegal means? How does someone go from being Mr. Untouchable to a government informant? And what does Barnes's story tell us about the nature of loyalty, power, and redemption in the criminal underworld? The tale of Nicky Barnes is a stark reminder of the human cost of the drug trade, both on the communities affected and for those who choose to participate in it. It challenges us to consider the complex factors that contribute to the cycle of crime and addiction in urban areas, plus the ongoing challenges faced by law enforcement in combating organized crime. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Feel free to like, comment, and share. How will Nicky Barnes be remembered? That's up for you to decide. Get ready for our next thrilling episode as we take a look into the life of Frank Lucas. He was the notorious drug trafficker who claims to have smuggled heroin from Southeast Asia in the coffins of fallen American soldiers. From his roots in rural North Carolina to his reign as the King of Harlem, Lucas's story is one of audacity, innovation, and of course, his ultimate downfall. Don't miss this fascinating exploration of the man whose life inspired the Hollywood blockbuster American Gangster. The real-life story of Frank Lucas is coming up next on American Crime Lords. Until next time, stay safe and stay dangerous.